ever been home alone and heard a noise from another room? A creak, a tap, a whisper. Most of the time, it's nothing. The house settling, the wind, your mind playing tricks. But what if it wasn't just a noise? What if it was a voice and it said your name? This is a story about that exact experience. It takes place in a typical mid-rise apartment building, the kind you can find in any city. Concrete floors, drywall, and long hallways that seem to carry every sound. Our main character had lived there for about a year. He was familiar with the building's personality, the night owl neighbor above, the early riser across the hall, and the empty apartment right next to his. He knew it was empty because he'd asked building management. It had been vacant for months. Empty rooms have their own acoustic signature. Sound travels differently. It bounces off bare walls, creating echoes that don't exist in a furnished space. Even the smallest sound can feel amplified, magnified by the silence. This is basic physics. What's harder to explain is when sound seems to appear from nowhere, especially in a place you know for a fact is unoccupied. The first time it happened, it was early evening. He was on his couch, scrolling through his phone, and then he heard it. His own name, spoken softly but clearly. The sound came from the direction of the empty apartment. He froze, listening. He expected to hear laughter, footsteps, some sign that someone was joking around. But there was nothing, just silence. He got up and looked through his peephole into the hallway. It was empty. He walked over to the shared wall and pressed his ear against it. Still nothing. He told himself it must have been a sound from another floor, carried strangely through the fence or the building's frame. It happens. Sound can do weird things in these concrete boxes. He dismissed it and went about his night. Several days went by and life was normal. The incident was forgotten, just a weird fluke. Then it happened again. He was in his kitchen making dinner. This time the voice was closer, more distinct. It felt like it was right on the other side of the wall. It didn't shout or whisper, it just spoke in a calm, neutral tone. "Are you there?" it asked. He froze again, a pot in his hand. The question hung in the air. He didn't answer. Who would he be talking to? He slowly put the pot down and walked to the wall, pressing his ear against the cool drywall. Complete silence. It was as if the voice had never been there. That night, he had trouble sleeping. Every creak of the building, every knock from the pipes sounded like a word about to be formed. His mind was searching for patterns in the noise, trying to make sense of something that felt deeply wrong. The third time was the one he couldn't explain away. He woke up abruptly just before dawn. It wasn't a nightmare that woke him. It was a sound, the distinct noise of someone clearing their throat. It came from inside the empty apartment. His heart started pounding in his chest. He lay perfectly still, holding his breath. Then the voice spoke again. It wasn't his name this time. It was a full sentence. "You left the light on." He shut up in bed, his eyes darting around his dark room. His lights were all off. The entire apartment was pitch black, save for the faint glow of the city outside his window. That was it. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, he contacted building management. He explained what he'd been hearing, trying to sound as rational as possible. They were polite but skeptical. They reassured him that the unit was absolutely vacant. One had been inside for months, no maintenance, no viewings, nothing. To put his mind at ease, they offered to open the apartment and let him see for himself. The maintenance worker met him at the door. He unlocked it, and they stepped inside. It was exactly as you'd expect, completely empty. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light coming through the blinds. The air was stale and still. There were no electronics, no furniture, no personal belongings. Nothing that could possibly make a sound. He felt a bit foolish, but also relieved. Seeing the empty space with his own eyes should have put an end to it. But it didn't. In fact, it got weirder. The voices changed. They stopped talking to him directly. Instead, he started hearing murmurs like a quiet conversation. It was too muffled to make out any specific words, but he could hear the cadence, the tones. It sounded like 2 or 3 people having a calm, ordinary discussion right next door. It was constant, a low hum of conversation just below the threshold of his own noise. He tried to be scientific about it. He took out his phone and started recording audio, leaving it running for hours next to the shared wall. He played it back, listening intently with headphones. Nothing. The recordings only picked up the ambient sounds of his own apartment, the fridge humming, traffic outside. The voices were only there for him. This is when he started seriously considering rational explanations. Auditory hallucinations are a real phenomenon. They can be triggered by stress, lack of sleep, or even extreme quiet, where the brain starts to create its own stimuli. It's called the Gansfeld effect. Your brain hates a sensory vacuum and will fill in the blanks, and the acoustics of shared walls can play tricks, merging sounds from different apartments into something that sounds like it's right next door. But one detail defied all of these logical explanations. The voices seemed to react to him. If he turned on his TV, the murmuring would stop. The moment he turned it off, it would slowly fade back in. If he coughed or spoke out loud, the voices would pause as if listening. Before resuming their quiet conversation, they weren't startled. They just waited. This interactive element was what he found most unsettling. It felt less like a trick of the mind and more like he was coexisting with something. He started avoiding his living room, the room that shared the longest wall with the empty unit. He spent his evenings in his bedroom on the other side of the apartment. Constant low-level chatter was draining his sanity. He felt like he was living next to ghosts, but the most boring ghosts in the world, just discussing their day. Then one Saturday, he heard it. The sound of movers. Boxes being dropped, furniture scraping against the floor. A new tenant was moving into the empty apartment. And just like that, the voices stopped. Complete silence. The normal, expected silence of a neighboring apartment. Days turned into a week, then two. He felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over him. It was over. Maybe it had all been stress. Maybe the emptiness of the space had been playing with his mind. Life returned to normal. Until one night, about a month later, he was getting ready for bed, walking down his own hallway. And he heard it again. A single word dot his name. But this time, it wasn't coming from next door. It wasn't muffled by a wall. It was clear, close, and it came from right behind him in his own apartment. He spun around. The hallway was empty. There was no one there. That was the last straw. He moved out 2 weeks later. He never found out who or what was in that apartment or if it had followed him. He just knew he couldn't stay. He later heard that the new tenant in the neighboring unit never reported any strange noises. Stories like this aren't uncommon if you know where to look. They pop up on internet forums and in quiet conversations. People describing voices that aren't tied to a person but to a place. The experiences are often eerily similar. The voices are calm, conversational, and never seem threatening. They're just there. Psychologists suggest our brains are wired for social interaction. In profound silence, the brain might generate phantom voices as a form of pattern completion, a way to fill a social void. It's a compelling theory, but these stories persist because of that one unsettling detail that so many people report. The voices don't seem to need a response. They act as if your attention is optional. They exist with or without you, and that subtlety is what makes an empty room feel not so empty. Because silence is just an absence of sound. But a voice, even a quiet one, implies a presence. And sometimes a presence doesn't need a body to be felt. Thanks for watching. If you have a story like this you'd like to share, leave it in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more strange stories. Stay safe out there.